Tonight we slip away from the screens, the scrolling, and the click-clack of keyboards to a place where memory is everything. Where history lives not in books or servers, but in the lungs of a storyteller, in the beat of a drum, in a voice echoing across centuries. You're in a West African village, just past sunset. The sky is the color of burnt indigo, stars so crisp they almost sting your eyes. Somewhere nearby, someone stirs a pot of millet porridge over a smoky fire. Chickens mutter sleepily under an acacia tree. Then you hear it, the low melodic pluck of a chorus string, like someone strumming a memory. The griot begins to speak. It's not a shout, not even a formal greeting. Just a low hum of a voice carrying across the dust. No notes, no script, no teleprompter. Just breath and tradition, and you're already leaning forward. Because somehow, you know, this man, woman, or child even, can recite the entire story of your family, back 10 generations, with commentary. You probably won't survive this memory game, by the way. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop that in the comments. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're on the edge of the Sahara now, somewhere along the historical trade routes, possibly in present-day Mali or Senegal. The land is flat and baked, but it breathes differently at night. The kind of air that seems to remember things. The griot sits cross-legged. Maybe he wears indigo robes stained deep from years of use. Or maybe she hums while stringing silver rings onto a leather strap. Either way, this person isn't just a storyteller. They're a keeper of memory. The fire crackles. Tonight's tale might stretch back to the Battle of Kirina, or maybe to how your great-great-grandfather once bargained 2 camels and a bolt of silk for the hand of your ancestor's sister. The griot doesn't check notes, doesn't pause. They just go. The voice changes cadence like a song, switching between prose and chant, like a train gliding from one track to another. Your job is just to listen. Or sleep. That's allowed too. See, the griot isn't just telling you a story. They're rebuilding a time that could be lost in a blink. If they forget, the memory dies. There are no notebooks, no dusty libraries, no margin scribbles. In many West African societies, especially before colonialism, writing wasn't considered superior. It was seen as something limiting. A dead thing. Written words couldn't sing. They couldn't change shape to suit the room or add a joke when the mood needed it. But a griot could make history dance. Mainstream historians agree that griots were walking archives, reciting family trees, land treaties, political upheavals, even court gossip, sometimes stretching back 500 years. But here's the kicker. They didn't just memorize facts. They preserved emotion, intonation, the mood of the moment. And let's be honest, that's way more useful than memorizing your Wi-Fi password. A fringe theory floating around suggests that griots may have used altered breathing patterns to enhance retention. Almost like vocal meditation. Others argue they leaned heavily on improvisation, anchoring memory with emotion rather than exactness. Historians still argue whether these storytellers use strict internal frameworks or let rhythm and melody guide the recall. Probably both. And don't picture this as a solo act under a tree every time. Sometimes the audience was a king, or a wedding party, or an entire market square with goats bleating and kids hurling mango seeds nearby. The griot adjusted the story like a DJ sampling live. In modern memory competitions, champions use what's called a memory palace, placing data into imaginary rooms in their minds. But the griots, they had real-world triggers. The grip of an old lute, the scratch of cowhide drumskin, the clink of ancestor beads around their wrist. Each was a door into memory. And it wasn't always high drama. One old griot's favorite story was how their uncle once fell into a river while reciting a poem and forgot the last 5 verses. "That's what you get," the griot chuckled, "for trying to rhyme while crossing a log. You try reciting 3,000-line oral poetry while tiptoeing over a crocodile stream. Not easy. Tonight, the story winds on. Gods and kings and rainfall patterns and scandal. And as the words pour out, you realize this isn't just storytelling. It's survival. It's diplomacy. It's psychological therapy and comedy and spiritual grounding, all braided together by memory. When you drift off, the griot keeps going. When you wake again in the night, there's a line about a forgotten queen who once ruled with only a dagger and a proverb. You smile, then fade again. Because in this place, history doesn't need a bookmark. Morning isn't loud here. It kind of stretches, slow and sleepy, like an old cat warming itself in the sun. You wake to soft murmurs and clinking cups. Somewhere, a baby hiccups. Someone grinds millet with a rhythm that's been passed down like a family name. You blink at the sky, washed pale and pink. And for a second, you forget you're listening to history. You just feel like you've stepped inside it. But the griot? Already awake. Already humming something under their breath that might be a melody or might be a memory. You follow them, not because you're invited, but because no one really owns a story here. You just step into it, like putting on a coat. Today's tale has teeth, not actual teeth. Don't panic, it's a metaphor. You're going to learn how these master storytellers actually managed to remember all that stuff. Like really remember. We're talking entire epics, with dates, names, weather conditions, and the occasional mid-story wrestling match thrown in for flavor. It wasn't guesswork. It was a system, fluid, flexible, and deeply layered. Here's where it gets fun. Griots didn't just rely on words. They used mnemonic devices built right into the performance. Think repeating motifs, call and response tonal shifts, and carefully placed refrains that acted like bookmarks. One old tale even opened every single stanza with the word njaka, a signal for the next scene, but also a cue for the storyteller's brain to shift gear. Modern scholars have marveled at this. Some compare it to jazz improvisation. Others liken it to coding. Historians still argue whether griots passed down fixed epics or improvised anew each generation, adjusting to the mood, audience, and sometimes even the weather. You follow your griot through the open market now. There's a woman balancing clay pots on her head, like she's auditioning for Cirque du Soleil. A rooster struts, like it owns the stall. Flies buzz lazily over pyramids of okra and cola nuts. Your griot stops by a drum circle and joins in, not with words this time, with rhythm. And you suddenly realize that this too is storytelling. Drums aren't background music here, they're language. In fact, the talking drum of West Africa isn't just a poetic name, it's literal. Skilled players can mimic the pitch and tone of spoken language, conveying names, places, even gossip, all through beats. This is one of the griot's secret tools. Not just for performance, but for storage. You know how a song from 5th grade can still live rent-free in your head. Now imagine encoding your entire village's political history in beats that catch you. There are legends of griots drumming out royal lineages across 3 dynasties while walking. That's multitasking on an Olympic level. And they weren't doing this in isolation. They were trained. The apprenticeship system for griots could begin in early childhood. You might start by memorizing your family's history, then your villages, then the great epics of the region. Each one practiced aloud, sung, chanted, whispered, shouted, like your brain was a muscle and repetition was weightlifting. An older griot might test a younger one by swapping story parts out of order, or slipping in a fake ancestor just to see if you catch it. It's kind of like oral history dodgeball. If you flinch, you lose. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some say griots kept track of complex genealogies, using strings of beads worn around their waists or necks. Each bead represented a person, a marriage, a war, a migration. The beads weren't decorative, they were a literal timeline you wore on your body. And if you touched them in sequence as you recited, it was like running your fingers through memory itself. There's no hard proof on the exact codes. Some say it was purely personal, others claim it was a universal griot language. Historians still argue whether these beads served as backup memory or full narrative skeletons. Either way, imagine trying to upload that into Google Drive. And did you know griots weren't just about the past? No. They also documented the present, in real time. If a king made a political blunder or a wedding went hilariously off script, the griot might include it in the next performance. And once it was sung, it was official. The oral record had absorbed it. The event was now part of what happened. So yeah, don't trip in public. It'll become a bedtime story for the next century. You wander past a tree with bark, worn smooth from decades of gatherings. Someone's carved symbols into it, spirals and zigzags and stylized figures. Not a written alphabet, more like memory triggers. The griot stops to run their fingers over it, eyes closed. And you realize that for them, the world is a memory palace. Every landmark, every family, every rainfall date, it all links together in one sprawling oral web. And when they speak, they don't just tell you what happened, they take you there. There's a quiet moment now. The drums fade, the market stalls fold up. The sun leans westward, casting long, sleepy shadows. And you think about all the stuff you've forgotten in your life. Passwords, birthdays, the name of that one guy from high school who borrowed your charger and never gave it back. Then you look at this griot, humming softly to the rhythm of their own memory, and wonder what it would feel like to carry everything. All your stories, all your people, all your truth. You find yourself walking through the edge of a village now, where the homes blend into the earth like they grew there on purpose. It's late afternoon, and the breeze has picked up just enough to rattle the tall grass in a way that makes it sound like it's whispering secrets. You follow the griot into a shaded courtyard, where several children gather in a semicircle, legs folded, eyes wide, hands still clutching snacks they've forgotten to eat. Tonight is a training session. This isn't school, at least not the kind you're used to. No blackboards, no chalk, no grumpy lectures about pop quizzes. Here, the classroom is wherever the griot decides to plant their feet. The lesson? Memory, rhythm, the art of layering story and sound so tightly together they can't ever come apart. You take a seat. Don't worry, you're just observing. And lean in as the griot starts to recite a tale so old, it probably predates pants. It's about a great hunter who outwitted a trickster spirit by pretending to be a crocodile. So far, so epic. But here's the thing. This isn't just a fun bedtime story. It's training. Listen carefully. The griot is using a teaching pattern, short patterned verses that repeat with small variations. The kids are expected to echo back parts of it. Call and response. You know, like those cheesy campfire songs where someone sings, "The moose, the moose," and the rest shout, "Swimming in the water." But this version, more poetic, more precise, and a lot more useful when remembering how to negotiate land disputes. Historians still argue whether griots intentionally composed stories this way for pedagogy, or whether the structure evolved naturally to accommodate memory. Either way, the repetition is sneaky. It builds scaffolding. Like laying down a chorus you can always return to, no matter how far your verses stray. One kid hesitates during their turn. The griot smiles, gently corrects, and repeats the line twice more, but this time with a hand gesture. A kind of swoop, followed by a tap on the ground. And boom, the child nails it on the next try. That's another trick in the griot toolkit, gestural memory. Many griots train using hand signs, steps, or even simple dance moves to mark transitions in a story. Imagine remembering a 20-minute fable because your body remembers the next motion. Like muscle memory, but for epics. And yes, that means griots are kind of like dancers. Kind of like poets. Kind of like historians. And also, weirdly, kind of like magicians. Not because they pull rabbits out of hats, though who knows, but because they can transform a space with just words and rhythm into a living archive. You watch as the griot continues and realize there's a cadence to the lesson, a pulse, almost like a heartbeat. It's not metronomic, not robotic. It breathes. You start noticing how every few lines end with a hum or a phrase like, "The path was long," or "and so it came to be." These aren't filler. They're anchors. Phrases repeated across different stories that act like verbal footholds for the griot climbing their way through vast, invisible libraries. In some traditions, griots use what scholars call story skeletons, basic frameworks that can be customized or expanded depending on the audience or occasion. Think of it like scaffolding in your brain. The structure doesn't change, but the detail filling it can shift nightly. Same bones, new skin. And that brings us to one of the more curious ideas floating around academic circles. Some believe griots used tuning phrases before each performance. These weren't part of the story itself, but more like warm-up scales for the brain. Reciting them would activate a particular memory pathway, kind of like saying "once upon a time," but with the neurological equivalent of a stretch and yawn. Historians still argue whether these tuning lines were fixed for each story or tailored by each griot. Some oral historians claim they heard griots tune themselves by singing the names of their ancestors under their breath before a performance, like tuning a guitar to the right emotional pitch. It's dusk now. You hadn't noticed it creeping in. The fire pit is glowing softly, and someone's brought out fried plantains and spicy stew, the kind that lights up your tongue and clears your sinuses in the same bite. You nibble quietly and notice the kids are still murmuring the lines they just learned over and over, like a lullaby wrapped in homework. And you can't help but compare this to your own world. Flashcards, YouTube tutorials, that weird mnemonic about the planets, or the one where every good boy deserves fudge. We've always needed tricks to remember. But here, the trick is the story. and the story is part of the griot. You can't separate the two without unraveling the whole thing. Suddenly, someone asks the griot a question. You don't catch it, but the answer makes everyone laugh. The griot launches into an improvised story, short, punchy, ridiculous, about a goat that got too proud and challenged a hyena to a dance battle. Obviously, it ends badly for the goat. But here's what's important. Even this silly tale follows the same patterns. The rhythm, the refrains, the movement. It's like the griot is flexing, showing how any narrative can be absorbed, shaped, and remembered, as long as you follow the right beat. Before long, the children start to nod off. The night wraps around the courtyard like a heavy blanket. A dog snores. Someone's gourd rattles with the last sip of water. And the griot? They just hum quietly, tuning the air, their voice barely audible over the crackling fire. And you think, this isn't just training, this is inheritance. Passed not through ink and page, but voice and rhythm. Through ears, through breath. And somehow, it feels safer that way, more human. You wake. Well, not literally, but your attention sharpens. As the griot rises the next morning before dawn, the village is still swaddled in mist, the kind that clings to your ankles and makes every breath taste like wet leaves. You trail behind, yawning into the silence, as the griot makes their way toward a clearing at the edge of the trees. There, arranged like sleepy sentinels, are a few younger griots in training, their eyes already fixed on the horizon. It's time for morning recitation. No books, no pens, just memory. The griot begins, voice still scratchy with sleep but steady. And then, just like that, you're hearing the king lists, a cascading waterfall of names, deeds, and dynasties going back centuries. It's mesmerizing and also completely overwhelming. You can't help but think, how on earth do they remember all this? Answer, they don't. Not all at once, not randomly. There's a structure, a system. See, West African griots didn't memorize books like we do, in a rigid page-by-page fashion. Instead, they constructed what scholars today call memory palaces or mnemonic landscapes. Except these weren't hypothetical. They were rooted in real places, events, and objects. A particular tree might symbolize an entire ruler's reign. A bend in the river might cue a war, a famine, a migration. In essence, griots encoded stories into their environment, into the rhythms of daily life, into geography. The physical world was their table of contents. As you listen to the griot name, yet another ruler, with a title that roughly translates to He Who Walks, without shame but also sometimes with goats, you notice a subtle shift in their voice, a change in tone, a tap on the knee, a pause before a new name. These aren't theatrics, these are oral punctuation marks. Unlike written language, oral traditions need built-in cues to guide listeners and speakers through long stretches of narrative. Think of them like verbal commas, paragraph breaks, or even hyperlinks. A rising tone might signal a coming metaphor. A sudden shift in tempo. You're heading into a battle scene. A whisper, get ready for scandal. Historians still argue whether these cues were consciously taught or absorbed through apprenticeship. Some suggest they're almost like accents, instinctual, passed down through mimicry and immersion. Others believe griots had personal systems, secret keys to their own memory codes. You think about this as the recitation moves into a new story. It's not just history anymore, it's lineage. The griot isn't just reciting facts, they're reciting family trees, names tied to births, marriages, deaths, feuds, songs. And here comes the twist. Many griots were expected to memorize the genealogies of multiple families, not just their own. Imagine being responsible for carrying the family tree of your neighbors, your town council, your enemy across the river, and that random cousin who lives in the next village but swears you owe him a cow. One study, yes, even sleepy stories sometimes involve studies, found griots who could accurately recall over 500 years of oral history, name by name, with only minimal error, and all without writing a single thing down. Now let's pivot. You're probably wondering, but what if they forget? What if they mix it up? What if the crocodile suddenly eats the king and the timeline implodes? The griot smiles at your concern. Here's the genius. Griots never perform alone. There's always an audience. And that audience often includes other griots, apprentices, elders, and villagers with partial memories of the tale. The performance becomes a collaborative act of remembering, a communal hard drive, if you will, constantly backing up and correcting itself. If the griot hesitates, someone might clear their throat, or snap a finger, or gently sing the next line under their breath. Correction here isn't confrontation, it's co-creation. It's a concept that modern academics call distributed cognition. The idea that memory isn't just in your brain, it's in the environment, the community, the social cues. Griots were masters of this way before neuroscience got fancy with it. And sometimes a griot would intentionally invite correction, a kind of test. They'd omit a detail to see if anyone noticed, or slightly change a metaphor to reflect current issues, like swapping elephant tusks with motorbikes to help younger audiences connect. The story flexes, but the skeleton holds. As the sun climbs higher, casting gold over the dew, the recitation winds down. The young apprentices are now taking turns, each delivering a segment. They fumble sometimes. They stammer, but when they pause, the older griot nods, not to rush them, but to reassure. The path is long. The mind takes time to stretch. You realize something else. These oral histories aren't just what griots remember. They're also how they remember who they are. In a culture where writing was once rare or even suspect, memory was identity. To be forgotten was to vanish, but to be remembered through name, story, or song was to live on. Even today, in parts of Mali and Senegal, griots are invited to births not just to bless a child, but to record them in verse. A name is sung, a meaning is attached. A tiny thread is added to the great web. It's no small thing to carry so many threads. And yet here they are, weaving them every morning under the trees, long before the world fully wakes up. The breeze returns, cooler now, tinged with the scent of charcoal and drying millet. One of the apprentices hums a tune softly as they pack away their things. You recognize it. A song the elder griot used the night before. The chorus rolls off their tongue without hesitation. And you think, they're not memorizing, they're embodying. And now, so are you. You're still basking in the soft rhythm of that morning hum when the griot stands and stretches, cracking their back like a door hinge that hasn't moved since last rainy season. Breakfast is light, some millet porridge with a touch of honey, maybe a few groundnuts. It's not about indulgence. The mind works best when the belly isn't waging war for dominance. Then it's time for a walk. Not a casual stroll, no. This is a ritual path, well worn by generations of griots, apprentices, and listeners alike. The path coils around a series of ancient baobab trees, each so wide it would take 10 people holding hands just to circle the trunk. These trees aren't just shade providers or convenient hangout spots. They're living memory markers. And today, they're your classroom. You pause under the first one. Its bark is gnarled like a wizard's knuckles, and the griot places a hand on it reverently. This is where the tale of the first blacksmith king begins. A man said to have tamed fire by speaking to it, convincing it to be less of a menace and more of a team player. You squint. The tree's shape does kind of look like a flame if you tilt your head and squint a little harder. This is symbolic thinking, and griots use it constantly. If something looks like a bird, it becomes the setting for a tale about a clever sparrow. If a tree's bark has deep furrows, it might cue a story of drought and persistence. Natural shapes become narrative devices, living cue cards scattered across the land. Historians still argue whether these connections were standardized or deeply personal. Some suggest there was a general visual vocabulary griots were taught, a kind of oral symbolic language, while others believe each griot developed their own interpretive system based on individual training and experience. You head to the next tree, where the bark has been carved ever so lightly with tiny, evenly spaced notches. The griot taps 3 of them, then tells a quick proverb. When the drum speaks, even the ants come to listen. You don't quite get it, but the rhythm stays with you. Turns out rhythm is everything in this world. It's not just about having a catchy beat, though sure that helps. Rhythm is a structural scaffold for memory. The way a line rises and falls, the number of syllables in a name, the beat between verses. These are not arbitrary. They're meticulously maintained, almost like bars in a musical score. That's why griots often speak in metered prose or chant-like delivery. If you were trying to memorize 500 years of oral history, you would do the same. It's far easier to recall the lion waits where shadows fold than there was a lion, and he hid near a bush, probably around 6 p.m. You laugh a little at that thought, and the griot raises an eyebrow at your chuckle. You think I'm joking, they might say, but they're smiling too. You arrive at a small stream. A flat rock juts out from the water like a forgotten table. The griot sits, motioning for you to do the same. Here, the performance changes. The tone softens. The story turns inward. This is a personal tale, the kind rarely told outside of training. It's about a failed memory, a time when, as a young apprentice, the griot froze during a royal ceremony. Hundreds of eyes, one forgotten verse, and a silence so heavy it threatened to crush the entire lineage of the speaker's training. You wince. Even just imagining that kind of pressure makes your palms sweat. But then, relief. The memory returned. Not all at once, but piece by piece. A smell, a sound, a gesture from the master griot. The cues snapped into place like puzzle pieces. And the story miraculously flowed again. This kind of failure isn't just tolerated, it's expected. Because griots don't memorize for perfection. They memorize for resilience, for recovery, for adaptability. In fact, many griots say, you don't truly know a story until you've forgotten and remembered it again. Like reheating leftovers and finding them better the second time. A gentle breeze carries the scent of damp earth and the faint sound of children playing in the distance. The griot leans forward and taps your shoulder lightly, as if reminding you to pay attention to your senses. Everything, they whisper, can be a prompt. That's not metaphorical. In griot tradition, multisensory encoding was common. a specific drumbeat, a certain incense, the texture of a woven mat. All could be tied to stories. It's like they had their own version of memory flashcards, except instead of flashcards, it was the world. You reflect on how modern schooling tends to strip things down. Textbooks, plain classrooms, sterile exams. The griot system, the opposite. Immersive, dynamic, and deeply embodied. Of course, it had its flaws. No system is perfect. Some tales were lost. Some changed irreversibly. Some griots wielded their knowledge more like a sword than a scroll. History bent for power. Scholars still debate how much of what was passed down remained accurate versus adapted for politics or flattery. But then again, you think, isn't all history like that a bit? The griot chuckles knowingly. Truth, they say, is the story that's most often believed. You look up. The sun is straight overhead now. The shadows short and the world bright. The trees are quiet. The rock is warm beneath you. You realize you've been sitting in a classroom without walls. A library with no shelves. A story with no spine. And yet, it holds. The griot stands. Come, they say. We'll walk back differently this time. And sure enough, you do. You take a different route through the village. Past a woman pounding millet, a boy chasing a chicken, an elder humming while weaving a basket. Each image carries a rhythm, a detail, a cue. The griot tosses you a line. Remember the story of the laughing millet? And you do. Not because you memorized it, but because it now belongs to the land you've walked, the sounds you've absorbed, the rhythm you've started to feel in your bones. You're not just listening anymore. You're remembering. You wake early again, not from noise, but from the strange hush of anticipation. The griot doesn't speak as you eat. They simply hand you a staff, a long polished stick carved with tiny notches and shapes. It feels ceremonial, like a wand, or maybe a conductor's baton. It has weight, but it's not for hitting. It's a memory staff, a griot's visual outline in wood. Today, you'll learn how tools and touch can anchor stories in space and time. This isn't about props for theatre. It's more like mnemonic architecture. When a griot grips the staff and their fingers land on a curved snake symbol, it's the cue to tell the story of the Serpent King of Ouagadougou. A zigzag line. That's the migration route of an ancient people. Even the number of ridges between sections matters. Historians still argue whether these staffs had a standardized visual language, like an alphabet of sorts, or if they were personal memory triggers meant only for the griot who carved them. Some staffs were passed down for generations, while others were reshaped by each new storyteller. You run your fingers along the grain and feel the indentation of years. But it's not just the staff that carries memory. Later that morning, the griot brings out a bundle of everyday objects. A small gourd, a strip of cloth, a broken sandal, a cowrie shell. You look at them, puzzled. None seem especially significant, until the griot begins. With the gourd, you're hearing the tale of a healer who could speak to droughts. The cloth becomes a tale of a forbidden marriage between rival villages. The sandal is a reminder of a traveler who walks the entire Niger River and back. These are anchor artifacts, items tied to narrative memory, much like flashcards, except way more poetic. And these objects aren't chosen at random. They're part of a long tradition in West African storytelling known as object memory mapping. Think of it like a physical version of a mind palace. Each item is tied to a verse, a moral, a character. The stories become portable, tangible, woven into the items griots carry or surround themselves with. The practice varies by region. In parts of Mali and Senegal, the objects are sacred, never to be touched by outsiders. In other areas, they're passed around, even given to young apprentices to hold while reciting. That way, the memory becomes embodied. You feel the weight of the tale, literally. The griot has you close your eyes and place your hands in a cloth bag. Inside are 5 small items. You are told to describe each one by feel, then tell the story associated with each. You struggle badly at first. It all feels like sensory overload. But something strange happens after the second round. You start to pair texture with plot. A smooth stone becomes a merchant's secret. A jagged piece of bone becomes a war story. You're not memorizing line by line. You're mapping emotion to sensation. By midday, the sun is sharp enough to etch shadows into the sand, and the griot suggests moving under shade. There, you're introduced to another memory tool, the call and response chant. Now, you've heard it before. From the first night in the village, when kids would sing Ankata, and others would shout back, "Let's go!" But this isn't just casual fun. It's a structural method used by griots to reinforce memory and engage audiences. Here's how it works. The griot chants the first line of a story, something rhythmic, almost melodic. Then you or anyone listening repeat it back. Then the griot adds the second line. Again, repeat. This continues until the chant becomes a kind of braid, woven from repetition and rhythm. The repetition isn't just for listeners. It reinforces internal memory loops for the griot. If a verse is echoed often enough, it becomes carved into the brain like initials on a tree trunk. And that's not all. There's a subtle system of tonal cues that guide the length of the chant. A rising pitch signals continuation. A flat pitch signals closure. You don't even notice you're learning these cues until you suddenly start predicting them, like catching the beat drop in a favorite song. You begin to understand. Griot storytelling is not just auditory. It's kinesthetic, visual, emotional, communal. It engages all of you. You start to feel for the rhythm in daily things. The creak of the well's rope as it pulls up water. The flip-flap of sandals against dirt. The syncopated chopping of vegetables in the midday meal. Every pattern feels like a memory waiting to be attached. And the best part? Laughter is welcome. Stories are often funny. Not knee-slapping stand-up comedy, but warm, clever humor. Like the time a hyena tried to outwit a farmer by pretending to be a lost goat. Or when a talking drum accidentally exposed an affair by mimicking the wrong voice. You laugh. The griot laughs. Memory, it turns out, is more sticky when it's joyful. There's a break in the shade, a shaft of sun illuminating the staff beside you. It now looks less like a stick and more like a timeline, etched with living detail. You run your fingers across it and whisper a line. The griot doesn't stop you. In fact, they smile. You're not just learning stories now. You're beginning to recall them. You sit cross-legged under a mango tree, the skin of the fruit still sticky on your fingers. And the griot is quiet. Not silent in a dramatic way. More like the quiet of someone waiting for the earth to exhale. They hold no staff this time. No chant. Just a look, as if asking, "Are you ready to think like a river?" This is the part no one warned you about. That griot storytelling isn't only about memorizing facts or repeating lines. It's about thinking cyclically, learning how time in oral tradition doesn't move in a straight line from A to B. It loops, overlaps, circles back on itself like a snake, swallowing its tail, or a story that starts at the ending. You hear it in the tale of the lion who loses his roar, only to find it hidden in the cave of his great-grandfather. Or in the saga of the hunter who dreams the future but forgets the past, and so must relive both. These are spiral narratives, and if you expect a neat beginning, middle, and end, you'll be sitting in the dark a long time. Historians still argue whether this looping structure developed purely from oral traditions, or whether it was a deliberate resistance to colonial and script-based models of chronology. Either way, it reshapes how you see memory. It's not about linear progression, it's about continuity, return and remembering in the most literal sense. Putting the pieces of community memory back together again and again. You're asked to tell a story today. Not a full one, just a fragment. You try to start with Once Upon a Time, and the griot gently coughs. That's not how it works. Instead, you're told to begin in the middle, anywhere. Maybe at the moment the chief forgets his own name, or when the sky goat steals the village drum. You pick a scene, awkwardly, and tell it. Then the griot says, "Now go backward." So you try to trace the events in reverse, explaining what led to the moment. Then you're told, "Now jump forward." And again, back. At first your brain rebels. It's like trying to write a song by shuffling the lyrics. But something cracks open. You begin to understand how non-linear memory creates a kind of narrative lattice, one that's less about plot and more about themes, relationships, emotional beats. The griot explains that the same story changes depending on where you begin. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature. Because oral memory isn't about perfect preservation, it's about resonance. What matters is that each listener hears what they need most in that moment. This is why, you're told, griots rarely recite stories the same way twice. It's not improvisation, not really. It's attunement to the mood, the time of day, the needs of the audience. Like jazz, but with ancient kings and shape-shifting snakes instead of saxophones. You're handed a dried calabash bowl. Inside are strips of leather, each with a word burned into it. Journey, betrayal, fire, rain, ancestor. You're told to pull 3 and create a tale. You draw fire, ancestor, journey. Your mind spins. So you begin. A boy steals a fire from the mountain. It burns the ancestor's tree. He journeys to the sky to apologize. The griot nods slowly, encouragingly. "And now," they say. "And now," you reply, "he must climb back down, but forgets what ground feels like. A quiet beat, then a smile. That's the thing about oral memory. It rewards imaginative scaffolding. You're not supposed to recite like a machine. You're supposed to hold the essence of the tale, like a scent on the wind, and let it reshape as needed. There's another method you learn today. Rhythm walking. It's deceptively simple. You pace a short path, perhaps 20 feet long, while telling a story aloud. Each step represents a beat or a phrase. The body begins to remember the story through motion, not just mind. The griot shows you how to step pause, one movement per image or plot point. If you forget where you are in the tale, your feet often remember, like muscle memory in dance. It turns out that griots often learn long genealogies this way. By walking, they'd travel the village paths, reciting the names of ancestors, each bend or rock associated with a name, a war, a birth, a loss. Some griots could recall 30 generations of lineage purely from steps. Your muscles ache after half an hour, but your recall improves. The body is stubborn. It keeps hold of things even when the mind stutters. You sit again, breath slower now, and the griot offers the final lesson of the day, questioning. Contrary to what you might expect, griots often encourage the young to interrupt. Why did the lion eat the moon? What if the hunter never returns? Did the snake really speak? You would think it would be rude, but the griot smiles each time. Because questioning, you learn, is part of memorization. It forces you to probe the cracks in the tale and fill them with meaning. Oral memory isn't passive reception, it's active remaking. Later, by the fire, you tell one of your stories again. This time you start with the fire, then jump to the ancestors' sorrow, then wrap around to the journey which turns out to be circular. The others nod, murmuring in approval. You grin. You're not just listening to stories anymore. You're thinking like one. The next morning starts not with a story, but a silence. You're used to this now. How griots don't begin by commanding attention. They invite it, like a slow wave easing onto shore. You sit among others in the compound, and today's lesson isn't about story elements or memory tricks. It's about tone. You never realized how essential sound is to memory until now. Not the words, but the shape of words. Intonation, cadence, rise and fall. Griots don't just speak. They sing-speak, with rhythmic lilt that tickles your ear in ways no textbook ever could. It's like being read a bedtime story by the world's most dramatic lullaby artist. Except instead of princesses and dragons, you're hearing about drought cycles, trade disputes, and royal betrayal with style. Mainstream historians often focus on content, dates, rulers, dynasties. But griots, they encode memory in the music of language. It's not accidental. Studies show that tonal shifts and musical phrasing anchor memory, especially in oral cultures. And West Africa, with languages like Yoruba, Ewe, and Mande, is rich in tonal complexity. You start to hear it everywhere now. Not just in stories, but in greetings, blessings, even complaints. There's a kind of choreography to speech. Words dance here. The griot demonstrates a short phrase. The king is dead, but the land remains. Spoken plainly, it's unremarkable. But in the griot's voice, it becomes poetry. The syllables roll like waves. The last word hangs like dusk on water. You repeat it, flatly. The griot sighs. Again, they say. You try it again, this time drawing out the vowel sounds, adding weight to the consonants. They king is dead. The group chuckles. Not bad for a beginner. But here's where it gets weird. In a fun, ancient magic meets theater kid way. You're introduced to mnemonic pitch patterns, tiny melodies griots attached to long name chains or phrase clusters. You learn that these melodies vary by region, family, even individual performer. In essence, memory becomes a personal soundtrack. This explains why two griots telling the same lineage might sound completely different. The melody is theirs, like fingerprints in sound. It's their emotional shorthand, a way to tether facts to feelings. There's an old debate about this, actually. Some historians argue that these musical phrasings aren't deliberate memory devices, but just regional performance styles. Others insist they're intentional, crafted to help griots memorize thousands of words without ever writing a single one down. You're leaning toward the latter, because once you hum a lineage, you can't forget it. Like how your brain remembers theme songs from cartoons you haven't seen since you were 7. You experiment with this yourself, creating a short melody for the tale of a clever tortoise who outwits the gods. It's silly, catchy, and completely unforgettable. You hum it for hours. Even in your sleep, it loops. Later in the day, you watch as a seasoned griot performs what looks like a simple list. Dates of harvests during 5 successive drought years. But each date is sung with a tiny musical shift. High tone for years with community loss. Low tone for years of survival. These aren't just memory tags. They're emotional indicators, letting the audience feel the story before they understand it. This leads to the next technique, vocal mimicry. Griots often adopt the speech rhythms of the characters they portray. The king speaks slow and deep. The trickster fox is clipped and sharp. The mourning widow has a tremble in her tone. These aren't random flourishes. They're cues that help both the teller and listener remember who said what and when. You start to try it yourself, nervously. It's awkward at first, but soon you're growling out lines in a faux lion voice and whispering as a scheming cousin. You feel ridiculous, but it works. The story sticks. By now, you're beginning to think that griots are part actor, part singer, part historian, and part data cloud. They don't store information in lines. They store it in sound environments. And that's a wildly efficient system when you think about it. Let's be honest. How much of your high school history class do you remember? A few names, maybe a date or two. Some vague sense that Napoleon was short. But here, memory is multisensory. You feel the story's texture, tone, temperature. You realize the griots never say, "Do you remember?" They say, "Can you hear it again?" That phrasing isn't casual. Because here, remembering means resounding, calling the past into the present through rhythm, tone, and voice. There's even a game for this. It's called Echo Path. One griot tells a story, while another follows a beat behind, mimicking tone, breath, even pitch. Like an echo in a canyon. It's bizarrely hypnotic to watch. You try it with a partner. Your timing's off, but you giggle through it anyway. You hear your voice for the first time as an instrument, not just a vessel. As the day fades, the griot tells you that in some villages, the most trusted griots weren't the ones who remembered the most facts, but the ones who remembered the sound of truth, the cadence of a thing spoken honestly. You'll hear it in your bones, they say. That's how you'll know you've got it right. So you lie back, letting your mind wander through tones and rhythms, half-formed stories and flickers of melody. The line between memory and music has blurred entirely, and somewhere between a lion's snarl and a grandmother's lullaby, you remember the harvest years. All 5, in order. With their emotional tones, the king may be dead. But the land, it sings. The next lesson sneaks up on you like an unexpected rain. You don't realize you're soaked in it until it's already working on your bones. Today, the griot leads you not to the performance circle, but to a shaded corner of the compound where the ground is swept smooth and empty, save for a few scattered pebbles and a carved calabash bowl. You think, this is a break. Finally, a rest day. Nope. This, as it turns out, is how griots train their visual imagination. Not by drawing, but by learning to see narrative maps, mental blueprints that anchor stories in spatial logic. The griot pours the pebbles into the bowl, gives it a swirl, and dumps them on the ground like dice. Tell the story again, they say. Which story? Whichever one these pebbles remind you of. You stare. It's chaos. Tiny black and beige stones, scattered with no order, no meaning. But slowly, your eyes find patterns. That cluster looks like a cooking pot. That line? Maybe a road. One group is clearly a family, another a rival clan. Suddenly, you're mapping characters onto shapes like a lazy detective playing connect the dots. And out comes the story. You fumble at first. Your fox character is too close to the warrior, and your calabash-shaped cluster turns out to be an elephant, not a drum. But somehow, the act of placing the narrative into space, anchoring it on a visual terrain, locks it into your head. This is what griots do constantly. They build story landscapes. Some use pebbles. Others trace lines in sand or etch with a stick. You've heard that in some regions, griots use bead patterns sewn into fabric to hold the shape of stories. A kind of textile topography. And here's the kicker. Historians still argue whether this kind of spatial storytelling counts as a form of proto-writing. Is a pattern of beads a sentence? Is a line in the sand a paragraph? Some scholars argue it's symbolic, not semantic. Others say that's a Western bias. And these visual spatial tools are a perfectly valid literacy system, just not one built for parchment and ink. You tend to agree with the latter. Because as you watch the griot tilt the pebbles to retell a conflict between two rival kingdoms, you feel as if you're reading a map of emotion. Grudges are represented by sharp diagonals. Reunions? Tight spirals. There's a logic to it that bypasses language entirely and dives straight into your brain's GPS system. That evening, you're taken to a performance. This one's different. No instruments, no costumes. Just the griot and a long stretch of dirt cleared into a path. Along that path, they walk, pausing at invisible story stations. You notice it quickly. Each step, each pivot, corresponds to a moment in the narrative. They're not walking randomly, they're pacing a memory palace. The method's not unique to West Africa. Ancient Greek orators used the same concept, placing parts of a speech in the imagined rooms of a house. But here, it's embodied. The griot becomes the traveler, the ground becomes the scroll. And you? You follow behind, trying to guess which stop is the betrayal, which is the lost child's return, which step marks the peace treaty. At one point, the griot pauses. "What happens here?" they ask, tapping their foot on the ground. You freeze. Then remember, this was where the elephant wept. Yes, the elephant who carried the widow's messages. That foot tap is the teardrop. You nod. The griot smiles. Later, you experiment yourself. You walk the story like a path. Every tree root is a plot twist. Every tuft of grass is a character. Your feet memorize what your mouth hasn't. And by the fifth pass, you know the whole tale, sequence, emotion, consequence, just from the route you walk. And here's the fascinating part. Some griots develop personal landscapes of memory, consistent terrains inside their minds. One might use a familiar riverbank, another, their grandmother's hut. The story moves through these internalized geographies, grounding history in a mental environment as vivid as a dream. One older griot tells you that his memory palace is a market. Every stall holds a family, he says. Every vendor sells a season. And if I forget a name, I just walk back toward the millet cellar. This is delightful and functional. By tying stories to imagined or real spaces, griots create a multi-sensory matrix that holds vast amounts of information without a single scroll. It's not rote memorization. It's narrative cartography. As dusk falls, you sit with the younger apprentices, playing plot paths, a game where one person marks a trail on the ground, and others must walk it while retelling the associated tale. You laugh as someone walks straight into a goat pen, shouting a plot twist about a stolen yam. Even mistakes are stories here. One child, no older than 10, flawlessly walks the tale of the hunter who married a rain spirit. Every turn, every step, is precise. How do you remember it all? You ask. He shrugs. I don't. My feet do. And that's it, isn't it? In this world, memory isn't a thing you carry. It's a thing you walk. You don't retrieve facts from a filing cabinet. You visit them. You tread the familiar loops of stories until the grooves become permanent, like well-worn shoes. And in doing so, you understand something both ancient and completely modern. Story is place. Memory is motion. And your mind? It's learning to travel like a griot, through space, sound, and story. You wake before sunrise, jolted not by the call of a rooster or the bustle of morning chores, but by a soft rhythm tapping against your ears. At first, you think it's rain, then wind, then maybe someone grinding grain. But as your brain stretches into consciousness, you realize it's a voice. No instruments, just a gentle cadence, murmuring a name again and again. The griot is rehearsing, but it's not rehearsal in the Western sense. They're not practicing lines. They're tuning the rhythm of memory itself. And what they're whispering over and over is not even a story. It's a genealogy. Just names. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one a link in a chain that stretches backward for centuries. This is how you learn about one of the most important functions of a griot, oral archivist. Griots were and still are the custodians of familial, tribal, and royal genealogies, living databases who could rattle off 20 generations with the confidence of a dinner guest reciting dessert options. The first time you try, you get 5 names in before your brain decides it's snack time. But your tutor just nods, amused. Now try again, they say. But this time, sing it. Sing it. You do. Softly, haltingly. But you add melody, rhythm, maybe a little sway of the shoulders. And suddenly it sticks. The tongue becomes a drum. Names fall into beat. Syllables line up like dancers. This is your next secret weapon. Musical mnemonic memory. Historians argue whether the griots invented these melodic systems independently, or whether they evolved from earlier ritual chants. Either way, the results are magical. When names are sung, they stay. When stories are rhythmic, they breathe. The griot's technique is deliberate. Long vowel sounds signal noble lineage. Sudden consonant bursts hint at scandal or betrayal. If a name ends in a hum, you know that person vanished mysteriously. If it ends in a snap, they were killed in battle. The melody becomes metadata. You spend the day with a griot, a female oral historian who specializes in maternal lines. Many griot genealogies traditionally emphasize male descent, but this elder insists on balance. Her lineage songs include midwives, weavers, warriors, women who ruled from behind mosquito nets. One sequence stands out. You ask her to repeat it. She grins and says, "You're hearing the line of salt." Salt? Yes, she explains. These women controlled the salt trade routes. Their names are sharp, like crystals. You listen again, and now you hear it. The brittle clarity of the melody. How it crackles at each transition, like footsteps crunching on sun-baked crust. You try to echo her, and she nods. That's the flavor. Good. Later, you practice with others. Everyone has their own genealogical melody. One boy's sounds like a lullaby. Another girl's? Almost like a joke, with playful pauses and little syncopated stutters. That's because her ancestors were tricksters, known for stealing cattle and returning them with apology poems. There's laughter here, always. History isn't sterile. It's funny, awkward, weird. Some names translate to he who talks too much, she of many bracelets, the one who fought a donkey. You ask if that last one is metaphorical. Everyone shrugs. Maybe. But the act of reciting them, the singing, the rhythm, the tone, it all creates texture. These are not dry records, they're musical identities. Even more fascinating, griots sometimes remix genealogies to fit occasion or mood. A funeral version might be somber and slow, a wedding one light and lilting. The names stay the same, but their delivery bends like light through water. This raises a point, you ask. But if the melody changes, doesn't that risk changing the memory? The griot nods solemnly. It does. That's why we rehearse. Memory is slippery. Rhythm gives it shoes. One afternoon, you're taken to visit a royal archive. Not a room, not a library, but a griot who specializes in noble bloodlines. They're old, older than sand, it seems, and you sit in awe as they murmur generation after generation of rulers, warriors, advisors, and rebel sons. It's mesmerizing. But midway through, they pause, blink, frown. The next name won't come. There's silence. You feel your stomach clench. Then they shake their head, laugh softly, and say, "Ah, yes. The one who married the baker's daughter. He always hides." Everyone nods in understanding. Apparently, some names are tricky. They resist. They vanish when the rhythm slips. And when that happens, the griot tell a side story or a joke until the melody resets. It's not seen as failure. It's part of the art, like a musician improvising through a missed note. Some scholars debate whether this adaptability means oral histories are unreliable. But griots counter. Written records decay. Stones crumble. But a story, sung and shared, adapts to live on. That night, you lie in bed, humming your own little chain of names, even if they're fictional. You invent an ancestor who tamed crocodiles, another who wrote with lightning, another who only spoke in riddles. You add rhythm, a few soft hand claps, and slowly you begin to understand. It's not just about memory, it's about ownership. When you can sing your lineage, you carry your past with you, anywhere, anytime. You don't need paper, you don't need a screen. You are the archive. And in the dark, as the crickets chirp and the night stretches like cloth, you hum one last name and let it echo in your chest. The heat of the afternoon wraps around your shoulders like an invisible shawl, and somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat pulses, slow, steady, unhurried. Not a performance, not a celebration, just practice. And not for an audience, for memory. You follow the sound and find a cluster of young griots in training seated under a baobab tree. At the center, an elder taps a carved djembe with careful rhythm, nodding as the group echoes syllables back to him in unison. The lesson? Drum language? You didn't expect this one. You'd heard about griots memorizing epic poetry, genealogies, even local laws, but using drumming as a mnemonic device? That's a whole new layer. You sit down quietly, trying not to disrupt the tempo. The elder greets you with a glance and a small smile, then returns to the rhythm. The students are vocalizing as they drum. Takata, tututa, dataka. Later, you ask what they're saying. It's a proverb, one whispers. A short one. It means, the river forgets no name. So that's today's lesson. The griots are learning to associate drum patterns with spoken wisdom. Each sound pair maps to a syllable. Enough syllables form a sentence. Enough sentences become a story. You try. You're terrible. Your dada sounds like a dropped potato. But the students laugh kindly and show you again. Here's the thing. These rhythms are not random. They're linguistic echoes. In many West African languages, especially tonal ones like Yoruba or Mande. Pitch matters. A single syllable can mean entirely different things based on tone. So when griots drum, they're not just making beats, they're mimicking the tonal flow of speech. It's a kind of musical shorthand, and it means a skilled listener could, if trained, hear a story through drumming alone. Historians still argue whether this form of communication qualifies as a written system. Some say yes, it's structured, symbolic, and capable of transmitting complex ideas. Others point out it lacks consistency. Either way, it's a powerful mnemonic aid. You are shown a longer sequence. It begins with sharp syncopation, da-da-ta-ta, then fades into a lazy roll of mid-tones. As it unfolds, the elder begins to speak over it, telling a tale of two brothers who quarreled over a goat, then reconciled by sharing a yam. It's silly, sweet, very human, and it sticks with you. The rhythm becomes a spine for the story. If the speaker forgets a detail, they just return to the last beat pattern and pick up the thread, like retracing steps on a trail. Every narrative has its rhythmic signature. At sunset, someone brings out a balafon, a wooden xylophone with gourd resonators, and you watch as one of the trainees begins tapping out a tune while chanting a lullaby. The keys sing with soft bell-like tones. You don't understand the words, but the cadence feels familiar. Another tool in the griot's kit. Instrumental storytelling. Not only do instruments underscore spoken tales, but sometimes they are the tale. There's a legend about a harpist who lost his voice, so he carved a kora with 21 strings, each tuned to a syllable of his mother's name. Every time he played, people remembered her. The name survived, even when he didn't. That's the point. Sound carries memory. During a break, the elder explains something unexpected. When griots travel, especially during droughts or war, they sometimes lose access to their communities for long stretches. In those times, the rhythm work becomes critical. It allows them to store knowledge internally, like flash drives with drum beats. This, he says, is why griots rarely suffer from dementia. Their brains are in constant workout mode. Rhythm, melody, movement, speech, multiple memory pathways firing every day. And not just solitary memory. Communal recall is a huge part of the tradition. If one griot forgets a line or detail, someone else can pick it up. There's no shame in it. The memory lives in the group, not the individual. Later that night, you sit near the fire, while 3 griots take turns drumming and chanting a love story. It's from centuries ago, but told like gossip from yesterday. And though you miss half the words, you feel the emotional arc in the rhythm alone. The soft staccato of nervous flirtation, the thunderous crescendo of an argument, the slow, trailing roll of reconciliation. It's all there. You can't help but think. In a world that's forgotten how to listen deeply, this is a kind of superpower, but griots don't think of it as performance. It's preservation. Rhythm isn't entertainment, it's scaffolding. Without it, the past crumbles. With it, stories stay standing. There's one more surprise. The griot hands you a small handheld drum, light, taut, worn smooth with age. Make your own rhythm, they say. You panic for a second, but tap out a timid beat. Ta-ta, pause, ta-ta-ta. Laughter. Not cruel, just amused. That's a rhythm for lazy goats, someone jokes. You try again, something sharper. Then again, softer this time. And slowly, without realizing it, you start telling a story. By now, you've learned that memory, in the griot's world, is never linear. It spirals, it sinks, It loops back on itself in the way of rivers or lullabies or dreams you wake from, but never quite forget. This morning you rise early, before the roosters, before the kettle drums, and find a young griot named Saliatu, rearranging smooth stones into a neat spiral on the ground. Each stone is marked with a symbol you don't recognize. Curved lines, dots, zigzags. You're mapping a story, you ask. She nods. A family line. 8 generations. She taps a stone near the center. This is the beginning, but not the start. You're confused, naturally. Griots don't do tidy timelines. They begin where the tale breathes best. Sometimes that's at a birth, sometimes a funeral, sometimes when a goat runs off and causes a minor scandal involving a borrowed scarf and an irritable aunt. Wherever the emotion lands hardest, Saliatu explains how these symbols aren't writing in the strict sense. They're memory anchors, part of a mnemonic practice some historians call lukasa, like the memory boards used by the Luba people. Each mark represents a concept, a person, an event, a turning point. But it's the griot's mind and voice that gives it breath. She picks up one stone and turns it over. This is the year of 3 droughts, she says. The millet failed, but the musicians didn't. You smile. That's a kind of poetry. As she speaks, you realize what she's doing. She's not reciting the story from the stones. She's using the pattern to draw it out of herself, as if the spiral is a dance floor and memory is doing slow pirouettes across it. Historians still argue whether tools like this count as proto-writing. Some insist they're purely mnemonic. Others believe they blur the line between oral and textual tradition, challenging how we define literacy altogether. You decide not to worry about definitions. The story lives, that's what matters. Later that afternoon, you're invited to a naming ceremony. It's joyous, musical, packed with food. But the real gift isn't the rice or stew or calabash full of something fizzy. It's the griot who steps forward and recites the child's ancestral poem. Each line is a link in a chain stretching back generations. The cadence rises and falls like a heartbeat. Daughter of Kumba, who danced during thunder. Grandchild of Baako, who traded salt with strangers. Blood of Awa, who spoke to horses. You get chills. The baby sleeps through the whole thing, but you suspect her bones will remember. You ask later how they can keep so many lineages straight. Surely some fade over time. The griot raises an eyebrow. That's what the songs are for. A forgotten name is like a door that won't open. You're told some griots specialize only in genealogical memory, and within that, in specific families or clans. When 2 people wish to marry, a griot might be consulted to recount both bloodlines to ensure no forbidden overlap. It's part romance, part detective work. These tales are not flat listings. They come with emotion, tension, and gossip. Who ran away? Who forgave? Who planted the first mango tree? A griot never just says, your great-grandfather farmed yams. They say, he coaxed yams from a cursed hill and never spoke during planting season. That's how you remember. And here's the weirdest part. It works. You start catching on to patterns. A certain phrase always comes before a betrayal. A specific rhythm signals a marriage. And every time someone says, under the moon of small rains, you know a birth is coming. Your brain, once sluggish with timelines and textbook dates, is now dancing to a new rhythm. Circular, emotional, musical. You learn that griots sometimes compose memory palaces, mental spaces they walk through in their mind. Each room holds a scene, a story. The rooms are filled with imaginary props. A spear, a torn robe, a carved bowl. These images cue memory. If a detail starts to slip, the griot steps back inside the palace and touches the object. There's an ongoing joke among griots that if you wake one of them mid-dream, they'll recite your third cousin's wedding menu from 10 years ago. You're not sure that's untrue. That night, you're invited to observe a rehearsal of one such palace in action. The griot closes her eyes, clutches a small stone, and begins. I open the door. There is sand. The sand is hot. It is 1762. My uncle is selling cola nuts. And off she goes. Her voice lilts. Her gestures rise and fall. Every detail is precise, and the room, though imaginary, feels real in her telling. You can almost see the footprints in the sand, taste the cola, smell the sweat. When she ends, there's a pause. No applause. Just a shared breath, like the room is inhaling the story together. You look at her and realize she has walked that palace so many times, she probably dreams in it. Her past lives in her voice, and thanks to her, so does yours. You're no longer just visiting. You're soaking in it now. The rhythm, the recall, the careful layering of memory upon memory. Your thoughts begin to echo with song-like phrasing. You catch yourself narrating your day the griot way. You walked under clouds that promised nothing. Your sandals betrayed you on the rocky path. The mango resisted your reach, but not for long. It's alarmingly soothing. Tonight the air is thick and velvety, full of lantern glow and distant drumming. You're back at the compound of an older griot, Baba Musa, who is known as the Weaver of Wars. His specialty, epic battles and tricky political feuds that sprawl across generations. But instead of a dramatic tale of conquest, he starts with a question. Do you know how a griot remembers a war? You shake your head, already leaning in. Not through numbers, not through dates, through food, through weather, through who cried. That catches you off guard. But he continues. If the millet crop failed, then the soldiers fought hungry. If the rain didn't come, the march took twice as long. And if the elder's daughter wailed in public, something terrible had happened. Baba Musa explains that war stories are told not for strategy, but for mood. Griots memorize wars by learning every emotional beat, not just the chronology. They'll recount the battle through the stitching of a tunic, the cracked voice of a mother, or the strange silence of birds before dawn. Historians still argue whether these emotionally tilted narratives count as reliable accounts. Some accuse griots of mythologizing. Others argue that emotional accuracy is its own kind of truth. One scholar even called it the empathy archive. Tonight's story is a war between two kingdoms you've never heard of. One had golden helmets, the other fought with poisoned calabash thorns. There was a treaty made over baobab wine and broken by a stolen flute. You're not sure what year it happened. Baba Musa never says. But when he whispers, the sun never rose that morning, you feel the tension tighten across your shoulders. What makes these oral epics unforgettable isn't just the facts, it's the repeated motifs. Every time a warrior faces a moral dilemma, a black heron appears. Every betrayal involves a broken drumskin. These narrative habits become hooks, just like rhymes in poetry. As the tale unfolds, you begin to realize you're being taught not just what happened, but how to remember it. The next morning you wake with one phrase repeating in your head. The pot boiled, but the yams stayed raw. You have no idea what it means, but it's sticky, like a line from a dream you half understood but don't want to forget. Over the next few days, you start practicing. You test your own memory using the griot method. Exaggeration, rhythm, emotion, image. To recall the sequence of past meals, you link them to moods. To remember directions through the village, you narrate each turn like it's a mini epic. You pass the goat with attitude, you dodge the sleeping dog of prophecy. And oddly enough, it works. Your hosts are amused. One griot tells you your efforts are clumsy but endearing, like a camel trying to sing. You take that as a compliment. Then, one evening, something unusual happens. The storytelling stops. Everyone gathers in silence. A young apprentice griot has been called to perform a test of 10, an oral exam passed down through generations. The rules are simple. She must recite 10 key histories across 10 families, each with perfect detail and emotional cadence. But there's a catch. The audience is allowed to interrupt at any time with a correction, a counter detail, or a challenge. You sit cross-legged in the dust, trying not to sneeze. The air holds its breath. She begins. Her voice trembles at first, but steadies. She navigates from kingdom to kingdom, from rain season to famine year. She describes a lost city paved in cowrie shells. She mimics the lisp of a long-dead king. When a baby cries in the crowd, she weaves it in, like the prince who cried the night he inherited the throne. Someone interrupts. She pauses, then counters the challenge with a layered explanation involving twins, goats, and a misinterpreted proverb. The crowd erupts, not in noise, but in shared, knowing nods. She's passed that round. You lean over to whisper. How many has she done? 8, someone murmurs. 2 more. She ends on a soft note. The tale of a mother who waited by a river for 30 years, hoping her son would return from war. No one interrupts. No one breathes. When she finishes, the elders bow their heads. She is now a full griot. And you're quietly in awe. You realize something deep in your bones. This is what libraries looked like before shelves, before paper, before font sizes and citations. The library lived in people. It still does. Your final days in the village blur into rhythm and repetition. You wake with song fragments lodged in your head and fall asleep with the steady beat of a talking drum echoing under your pillow. You've stopped trying to record things the modern way. Your pen lies forgotten in your pack, wedged beside a half-eaten biscuit and a guidebook that's been reduced to a coaster for your water cup. Instead, you're listening now, properly, and something strange is happening. You're beginning to feel the structure of stories more than analyze them. You can sense when a new tale is about to reach its climax, not by logic, but by the tempo in the griot's voice. You can guess the morale before it arrives, just from the way the wind seems to pause, or how a single gourd rattle silences a dozen people. You're not becoming a griot, not by a long stretch, but your mind is retuning itself, like switching from Netflix binge mode to campfire trance mode. And tonight, in the still warmth of the evening, you sit with 3 elder storytellers beneath a tree, full of sleepy birds, listening to a particularly delicate performance, a genealogy chant. Now this isn't a story with heroes or betrayals or mysterious animal messengers. It's just names, thousands of them, each linked with precise rhythms and tiny inflections, forming a family lattice that stretches back hundreds of years. One griot chants, the others nod and hum softly when the flow is correct, correcting only with a click of the tongue or a subtle cough if something's off. It's not for outsiders, but they let you sit close enough to hear. The first name belongs to the man who spoke to Millet. You're not sure if it's metaphor or fact. The next is She Who Tamed the River's Tantrum, followed by The Child Born with Salt Behind His Ears. You realize these names aren't just identifiers. They are poems in miniature, emotional footnotes to lives otherwise lost to history. Historians still argue whether these genealogical chants are accurate records or elaborations layered with generations of creative flair. Some suggest they're like family photo albums drawn in words, truthful in spirit, if not always in literal fact. Others maintain that the memory systems are precise enough to rival any written archive. In Mali, for example, griots have been called upon in legal land disputes to recite centuries-old lineage claims, and their testimony holds up in court. You look over and see a teenage apprentice quietly mouthing the chant as it flows, reinforcing her own mental map. It's a map you realize is built not with borders and roads, but with people and emotion. No wonder the griots say, "You are where your ancestors are remembered." It starts to dawn on you how trained these memories are. This isn't just natural talent. It's cultivated. From childhood, apprentice griots are taught advanced mnemonic techniques, matching people to musical notes, associating events with textures or colors, building memory palaces in their minds that you could walk through like actual rooms. Want to remember a drought? That's a dusty courtyard with no shadows. A betrayal? A red calabash with a cracked handle. A peace treaty? The scent of roasted okra and wet earth. By tying narrative to sensation, griots not only retain facts, they retain feeling. And you, modern, overstimulated, uploaded you, start to see the cracks in your own memory habits. You've been offloading memory to gadgets, notes, cloud service. But these storytellers carry a full encyclopedia in their heads, singing it, tasting it, feeling it. Still, there's a cost. One griot you speak with confesses that the burden of memory is a lonely one. They must remember everything, even the stories that shame their families, the betrayals, the losses. Forgetting is not an option. Forgiveness lives beside remembrance, not apart from it. She says, "There are names I must say, even when my throat closes." That sits with you for a while. The final night, the whole village gathers. Not for ceremony, but for sheer indulgence. It's a griot freestyle session. One by one, storytellers rise and improvise tales from snippets tossed out by the crowd. Someone yells, "A crocodile that can't swim," and the griot spins it into a parable about leadership. Another calls, "A moon made of corn," and it becomes a silly love story between a stargazer and a hungry witch. You laugh. You actually laugh so hard you nearly choke on your mango pit. But then, the elder griot, the one you call grandmother rhythm in your head, leans forward and begins her own freestyle. It starts absurdly, something about a donkey who thinks he's a prince. But halfway through, the tale bends. Suddenly, you're hearing about a boy who leaves home, chasing something he doesn't understand. He asks too many questions. He stays too long. And yet, he listens. You freeze. She's talking about you. Not in any unkind way, but she's absolutely folded your presence into a living tale. The village chuckles gently, not mocking, just welcoming. And for the first time, you feel written into the story. Literally, you've been remembered. When you leave, no one hugs you goodbye. It's not that kind of place. But the teenage apprentice griot presses a stone into your palm. "It's for your pocket," she says, "when you forget how to remember." You're not sure if the stone has a name, but you already know what story you'll tell about it. The plane ride home is jarring. There's air conditioning so cold your teeth chatter, rows of blue-lit screens blinking nonsense, and the background drone of an engine that sounds nothing like a talking drum. You scroll through your phone for distractions. Weather updates, emails, an ad for memory supplements. None of it lands. Your mind feels too full for modern life. You glance down at the stone in your jacket pocket. It's smooth now from your fingertips, rubbing it absent-mindedly. A warm little artifact, tucked between continents. A reminder, not of a place exactly, but of a way of thinking. A way of being with knowledge. Memory, you realize, doesn't just live in the head. It lives in rhythm, repetition, community. And in the West African griot tradition, memory is never passive. It's not a list or a ledger. It's performance. It's ceremony. It's inherited duty, and sometimes playful improvisation. You're beginning to see how oral cultures may remember better, not in spite of lacking writing, but because they never had the luxury of forgetting through it. Historians still debate whether the griot lineages of West Africa rival written records in terms of precision. Some scholars point to gaps, to inconsistencies across time and tribe. Others argue that griot memory outperforms archival data because it's flexible. It absorbs new truths while keeping old lessons alive. There's one 20th century French colonial officer, Captain Paul Marty, who once tried to transcribe a griot's chant. He gave up after a dozen pages, not because the griot stopped, but because the meaning kept shifting subtly each time the chant returned to the same phrase. "You do not pin a bird's shadow to the wall," the griot told him, unbothered. The griots aren't memorizing static texts. They're curating living libraries. In one village you visited, the local griot told you that each performance must breathe differently depending on the listener. Tell a story too strictly, and it dries up. Deliver it too freely, and it loses its spine. It's like jazz, you suppose. Improvisation within an invisible, sacred frame. And you remember how your guide explained it. We don't say once upon a time. We say, I open my mouth and words come walking. Because stories aren't made of sentences here. They're made of people. And that's the final, most haunting thing you carry home. In West African griot culture, remembering someone's resurrection. To chant a name is to stitch their life back into the present. It's why a griot doesn't speak of the dead. They speak with them. One night, near the Sahel, you sat around a fire where an elderly griot sang a funeral praise poem for a warrior named Dogo. He died in a war no one even remembers now. But that night, as the griot summoned the rhythm, his voice slowed and thickened, and suddenly Dogo was there. Not as a ghost or a fable, but as part of the air. And the griot said, as long as someone sings your name right, you are never gone. You think of all the names you've forgotten. School teachers, cousins, people from old Facebook photos. They didn't get a rhythm. They didn't get a verse. And you wonder what it would mean if you did. If, instead of being buried under algorithms, we were sung gently back into being, again and again. You begin to understand why the griot tradition is not a novelty or relic. It's a form of resistance. Against time, against erasure, against the idea that only written words have weight. Your memory isn't perfect. You won't recall every detail of every tale you heard. But your way of remembering has shifted. You now know how a cadence can anchor facts, how metaphors can make meaning last, and how emotion isn't a distraction, it's the glue. You think of the girl mouthing names under her breath, her future filled with syllables she hasn't yet earned. You think of the elder, correcting a misremembered rhythm with a single click of her tongue. You think of the donkey prince, the moon made of corn, the salt-eared child. You think of a stone in your pocket. You think of a story that now contains you. And you smile, because while you may never be a griot, you now understand what it means to walk with memory instead of just carrying it, to let it sing you home. Now gently ease your breath. Let it settle like sand drifting slowly to the bottom of a quiet river. You've walked far tonight, through villages of rhythm and firelight, among names older than maps, across stories told not on paper, but in pulse and pitch and patience. You've felt what it means to remember not just with your mind, but with your whole self. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to feel the melody of memory too. So, take a moment now. Let your limbs grow heavier. Let the corners of your mouth soften. The room around you is still. The air cool or warm, or somewhere in between. Just right. In the dark behind your eyelids, imagine the fire glowing low in the village square. A lone drum echoes, not loudly, but with comfort. The voice of a storyteller begins a new tale. Not one you have to follow, just one to float beside you. You're not asked to remember it, just to rest near it. And as the rhythm slows and your breath grows deeper, lighter, steadier, you feel safe, anchored, like a story softly closed and carefully placed back on the shelf, ready to be told again when the time is right. Good night, memory keeper, and sweet dreams.